America has never been closer to a food crisis. Not the kind you see in documentaries about distant countries. Not empty shelves from a temporary storm. Not a supply chain hiccup that sorts itself out in a few weeks. No. This is something deeper, slower, and far more dangerous. By 2026, groceries, the most basic necessity of civilized life, are transforming into luxury items. Families aren't tightening budgets. They're rationing food, stretching meals, skipping essentials, switching to cheaper processed calories because fresh produce costs as much as takeout used to. The warning signs are everywhere. Supermarkets closing in poor neighborhoods, retail shrink driving stores out of major cities, farmers going bankrupt, energy costs spiking, transportation systems failing, and corporations quietly raising prices in ways no one fully understands. This isn't inflation. This isn't normal. This is a food system cracking apart, one layer at a time. Logistics, labor, farmland, fertilizer, fuel, all pushing America toward a reality no one wants to admit. The richest country in the world can no longer feed its people affordably. 1. The grocery store collapse when food retail became financially impossible. It starts quietly, the way most collapses do. A supermarket closes on the far side of town. Nothing dramatic, just a sign on the door, a few shopping carts left behind, a building that already looks like it's been dead for years. People shrug, drive to the next store, tell themselves it's just one location, but then the second store closes, then the third. And then suddenly a whole neighborhood wakes up to a reality no one ever believed could happen in America. There is nowhere left to buy food. This is the grocery store collapse. Not a headline, not a prediction, but a slow motion catastrophe unfolding aisle by aisle. The economics of food retail have turned inside out. Grocery chains operate on margins thinner than the plastic bags they hand out. And in 2026, those margins finally snap. Shrink is out of control. Theft isn't a petty annoyance anymore. It's a business-ending threat. Stores in big cities lose 20, 30, even 40% of their merchandise to organized theft, and insurance companies refuse to cover the losses. They either raise premiums to impossible levels or pull out entirely, leaving grocers to choose between paying for security they can't afford or shutting down before the next smash and grab finishes the job. Labor costs rise, electricity rises, freight rises, rent rises. Refrigeration alone is a monthly bill so high some stores spend more keeping lettuce cold than they earn selling it. Every cost goes up, except the one thing they can't raise without losing the customer entirely: the price of food. But the prices still go up anyway. Companies slap inflation on every shrinkflated item in the aisle, raising prices more than the costs justify because they know customers can't track it all. A box of cereal that used to cost $3 now costs $6. Milk edges toward $5. Eggs swing between reasonable and absurd like a mood swing. By the time the average family notices the price hikes, the stores are already bleeding out, and when grocers finally close, the land doesn't get reused. Big empty buildings sit on cracked parking lots like headstones of an era when retail still worked. Cities lose their last affordable option, and what fills the void? Dollar stores with no produce, gas stations with overpriced snacks, maybe nothing at all. Entire zip codes turn into food deserts overnight, not because farmers stopped growing food, but because the economics of selling it stopped adding up. The truth is simple: grocery stores are the canaries in America's economic coal mine, and those canaries are dying fast. Once the local supermarket goes, the community starves long before anyone sees an empty shelf. And this is just the first fracture in the system. If you think the store collapse is bad, wait until you see what's happening at the source: the people who grow the food in the first place. 2. The farming implosion, when America's food supply lost its foundation. Out in the countryside, far from the neon signs and closed-up supermarkets, another collapse is unfolding. Quieter, slower, but far more catastrophic. It's the kind of collapse you don't see until it's too late, because the land doesn't scream when it dies. It just stops producing. America's farmers, the backbone of every grocery aisle, are disappearing. Not metaphorically, literally. They're aging out, going bankrupt, selling off land, or giving up because the economics of farming no longer makes sense in a country where everything costs more except the crops themselves. The average American farmer is now pushing 60. The next generation isn't taking over. Why would they? Farming isn't a livelihood anymore. It's a financial dare. You spend a year planting, watering, fertilizing, praying, and at the end of it all, you might make a profit smaller than a month's rent in a major city. One heat wave, one drought, one broken tractor, and the entire operation sinks. And tractors. The price of farm equipment has exploded. A new combine harvester costs more than a suburban house. Fertilizer prices spiked so hard they never came back down. Water rights are becoming a luxury item. Diesel is a nightmare. Land taxes are rising. Insurance is rising. Equipment loans are ballooning. Meanwhile, crop prices stay flat because giant supermarket chains negotiate farmers into the ground. The people who grow the food make almost nothing. The corporations that sell the food make everything. So farms close. Quietly. 100 acres sold here, 1,000 acres sold there. The land doesn't vanish, it gets swallowed. Corporations, foreign investors, billionaire portfolios, they scoop up American farmland like it's monopoly property. The family farm becomes a boardroom asset. Food production becomes another commodity to be traded, not protected. When a farm dies, it doesn't make the news. There's no ribbon cutting, no shutdown notice, no crowd gathered outside. It's just another patch of land that used to feed the country and now feeds profit margins instead. And every lost farm tears another thread out of the food system's fabric. And then there's the climate pressure. Drought stretching longer, floods hitting harder, heat waves killing crops before harvest. States once known for stability, now swinging between extremes like they're on a hinge. The soil is tired. The water tables are shrinking. The costs to adapt are astronomical. Too astronomical for anyone except the massive conglomerates buying up what the family farmers leave behind. The implosion isn't dramatic. It's not sudden. It's a slow surrender. Farmers watching their land dry, their savings drain, their debt climb, until keeping the farm is no longer heroic, just impossible. And when the farms go, the grocery stores don't stand a chance. A nation can survive retail collapse. It cannot survive food collapse. But even the farms that remain can't outrun the next crisis, because the food they grow still has to reach the people who buy it. And that system is cracking just as fast. 3. The supply chain death spiral, when transport costs made food too expensive to move. The moment the food leaves the farm, it enters a system that used to function like a quiet miracle. Trucks humming through the night, warehouses humming in the background, distribution centers choreographed like clockwork. Most people never noticed this machinery because it worked. That was the whole point. A system that only draws attention when it fails is a system that was once flawless. But by 2026, the system doesn't work anymore. It strains, buckles, clogs, collapses, and then collapses again. Moving food from one place to another has become one of the biggest expenses in the entire supply chain. Diesel prices spike, then drop, then spike higher. Trucking companies can't find drivers. The drivers they do find can't afford to stay on the road. Repair costs for a single semi-truck can wipe out a month of revenue. Tires, brakes, parts, labor. Everything costs more, lasts less, and hits harder. And behind it all sits a deeper truth no one wants to admit. America's entire logistics network was built for a country that no longer exists. Roads are crumbling. Bridges are structurally decaying. Rail systems are decades out of date. Ports jam with delays. Everything takes longer, costs more, and breaks easier. A box of lettuce used to travel from California to Chicago for a few dollars. Now it travels for 15, 20, 30. Not because the lettuce changed, but because everything around it did. Refrigerated transport, once routine, is now a luxury service, and grocers are forced to choose between paying triple the shipping cost or letting produce rot in the warehouse. And then there are the bottlenecks, the moments where everything gets stuck at the same time. A shortage of pallets delays shipping, a shortage of drivers delays unloading, a shortage of warehouse staff delays distribution, a broken refrigeration unit forces a truckload of food to be dumped. Each delay raises costs, each cost raises prices, each price raise pushes another family toward hunger. Meanwhile, the global system that supported America's food imports is cracking too. Countries that once exported cheaply are now protecting their own supply. Grain shipments slow, produce shipments shrink, exchange rates wobble, political tensions disrupt ports. Suddenly, the foods Americans take for granted, bananas, rice, tomatoes, beef, begin to feel less like basics and more like luxuries that might not show up next week. And even when the food does arrive, stores can't absorb the cost. So prices climb and climb and climb. The price tags don't shock anyone anymore. That's the scariest part. People are numb to the numbers. They don't ask why a gallon of milk costs $6. They don't question how a bag of chips became $5. They don't blink when chicken costs more than steak used to. They just adjust their diets downward and hope the money stretches. This is the supply chain death spiral, a loop where every weakness magnifies the next, where every delay increases every cost, and where every cost pushes groceries closer to becoming a luxury category. It's no longer about scarcity, it's about affordability. The food still exists, but the system that moves it is failing at the exact moment Americans need it most. And looming behind all of this is the biggest threat of all, the handful of corporations that now control nearly everything we eat. 4. The corporate food monopoly, when 4 companies controlled what 330 million people eat. If you want to understand why groceries feel like luxury items, you have to follow the supply chain all the way to the top. To the boardrooms where food prices aren't born from droughts or diesel shortages, but from strategy decks and shareholder calls. By 2026, the American food system isn't a marketplace. It's a monopoly disguised as one. 4 corporations control meat, 4 control grain, 3 control grocery distribution, 2 control seeds, 1 controls nearly every major brand you grew up with. Walk into a supermarket and look around. It feels like variety, but it's an illusion. The cereal aisle is General Mills, Kellogg's, and Post wearing different costumes. The snack aisle is PepsiCo versus PepsiCo. Frozen foods are owned by a handful of conglomerates that gobbled up every independent brand decades ago. Even the organic section, once the refuge of small producers, is now controlled by the same giants who sell junk food in bulk. When so few companies control so much, price isn't a reflection of cost. It's a reflection of power. And in 2026, power costs money. These corporations raise prices not because they must, but because they can. They shrink portions not because they're forced, but because it increases margins. They replace ingredients, cut quality, and pad products with fillers. Then blame inflation, because inflation has become the perfect excuse. No one can fact check them. No one can challenge them, and if a small competitor tries, they buy it, crush it, or outprice it until it disappears. Meanwhile, everything is scaled to serve shareholders, not customers. A loaf of bread isn't baked for nutrition, it's baked for quarterly earnings. A jar of peanut butter isn't priced based on peanuts, it's priced based on what the company thinks you can't live without. And what about the farmers? They don't set prices, they take whatever the corporations dictate. What about grocery stores? They pass on the increases or they die. What about consumers? They absorb the blow or they go without. The companies at the top feel no pain. Everyone below them does. This is why even when supply chain issues ease, prices stay high. This is why even when fuel costs drop, groceries don't. This is why shrinkflation never reverses. These corporations aren't competing, they're coordinating through market dominance. A near monopoly doesn't need to cheat, it only needs to exist. And because the system is consolidated, any disruption becomes catastrophic. If a single meat processing plant shuts down, a quarter of the country feels it. If a single distributor has a strike, entire regions lose access to fresh food. If a major corporation decides to pull out of a market, an entire state can become a food desert. A food system this top-heavy heavy doesn't fail gracefully, it fails instantly, and when it does, there's no backup, no redundancy, no competition to fill the void, just empty shelves and prices that climb like rent. This is the quiet truth America is waking up to. The food system isn't broken, it's functioning perfectly for the corporations that own it. Everyone else is paying the price, and the final bill shows up in the place where the collapse becomes impossible to ignore. The hunger crisis spreading through a country that once called itself the land of plenty. 5. The hunger crisis, when a nation of plenty became a nation that couldn't afford dinner. The richest country in the world is starving, not in the way textbooks describe famine, but in the quiet, invisible way a modern empire collapses. The shelves are still stocked, the trucks still roll, the restaurants still glow late into the night, but behind the facade of abundance, millions of Americans are running out of money long before they run out of month, staring at grocery receipts like eviction notices and rationing meals the way previous generations rationed gasoline. Hunger today doesn't look like the Dust Bowl. It looks like a mother in a Walmart parking lot holding 2 bags of groceries that cost $80 and will feed her family for 2 days. It looks like a senior citizen buying cat food because it's cheaper than canned soup. It looks like a child who doesn't understand why dinner keeps getting smaller. Food banks are overwhelmed. Lines stretch around buildings. Families who once donated are now receiving. Shelves empty the moment they're stocked. Volunteers whisper to each other that they've never seen demand like this. Not in recessions, not in pandemics, not ever. America isn't just hungry, it's quietly starving. But hunger in 2026 isn't caused by scarcity, it's caused by cost. The food is there, people simply can't afford it. Groceries have doubled, sometimes tripled, while wages barely budge. A working class family that used to spend $120 a week now spends $240 and gets less for it. Meat becomes a luxury, produce becomes a treat, healthy eating becomes a privilege. Everything processed, salty, fatty, cheap, those become the staples of a population trying to survive an economy that punishes nutrition and rewards calories. Fast food, once the refuge of the poor, is now a budget-breaking gamble. A simple meal for 4 approaches the cost of a utility bill. Even dollar menus disappear, replaced by value menus where nothing costs less than $3. Families stretch pasta, rice, beans, anything that fills a stomach cheaply. The nutritional collapse begins long before anyone calls it a hunger crisis. And the psychological damage is worse than the physical. Parents skip meals so their kids can eat without ever admitting why. Workers hide their lunch at their desks because eating nothing is embarrassing. People avoid social gatherings because the cost of bringing a dish is too high. Hunger isolates long before it debilitates. Meanwhile, politicians insist the economy is strong. Corporations celebrate record profits. Analysts on TV claim inflation is cooling. But in the aisles of Dollar Tree, a mother is calculating how many calories she can buy for $20. In the aisles of Aldi, a retired veteran puts back the chicken breasts because the price went up again. In the aisles of Kroger, a young couple argues softly about whether they can afford eggs this week. This is what the collapse looks like. Not empty shelves, but empty wallets. Not famine, but fear. Not scarcity, but a slow, grinding erosion of dignity. America's food crisis isn't coming, it's here. It's happening in silence, in shame, in the spaces between paychecks. Groceries have become luxury items, not because they changed, but because the country did. The empire is still standing, the stores are still open, but the people inside are walking through aisles they can no longer afford. And when a nation can't feed its own people, the collapse isn't beginning. It's already well underway.